Okay, welcome everyone to our second November program. You have Woods, Now What? This is geared towards our newer woodland owners or those who work with new woodland owners about things to consider when you're first, either maybe you've owned the woods it's been in your family for generations, but now you're the manager and you haven't been that involved in your woods, or maybe you have just purchased woods. Either way, there's a few important steps that need to be taken when you first are thinking about woodland management. And so we're really glad to have you here today. My name is Jen Hicks. I'm the Director of Communications and Outreach. I'm also the editor of the newsletter Maine Woodlands. So if you are a member and you receive that, I'm the one that edits it. I don't write a whole lot in it. We have some terrific people who contribute to it, so I'm always appreciative of input. The point of today is to get you starting to think about the basics about your journey into woodland management. We have Jeff Williams here today. He's a self-employed consulting forester in are you in York County?
Yep, right on the northern edge of York County.
Yeah. He's also a member of our board of directors, Maine Woodland Owners, and has been been a consultant forester. I'm thinking about 10 years or so, maybe a little longer.
A little bit more than a decade, yep. Yeah. Seems wild to say.
Jeff works with a lot of new woodland owners, has a lot of insight about what some of the challenges are, and he's developed a nice program today for this group. He has a short PowerPoint. The idea is to generate some thinking and then get a dialogue going. So at probably about the 30-minute point or so, we'll have some time for questions for Jeff and a discussion. So that, but while he's presenting, if you have any questions or you want some clarification, you could turn on your video, raise your hand, and I'll be watching for folks who have questions. You could type in a question in the chat section, or you can just unmute yourself and just jump in and just ask your questions. It's not a large group. I think we can manage that pretty well. So I am curious about, we did see where a lot of folks are from and what they have for woods. Jeff, I'll leave it up to you, but maybe you might want to go around and just have everybody say if they're new or if they're just curious about, if they work with new woodland owners, and maybe find out where they're coming from in this program, or you could just jump right in and we can get into
sure.
That. It's up to you. I'm gonna hand it over to you. Again, appreciate everybody being here today.
Yeah,
and
thanks.
Jeff, thanks so much for agreeing to present.
So, without further ado, my name is Jeff Williams. I'm a forester. I studied under a now deceased forester who is very involved with Maine woodland owners named Everett Toll. Some of you may know his name, but I've been at it about a little over a decade now and have learned a number of things in that short period of time when working with owners. So yeah, if you're interested, go ahead and type in the chat how long you've been an owner. If you purchased your property, maybe if you inherited it. I'm happy to take questions. You can interrupt me at any point in this to steer the discussion into something you're more interested in if you want. We can always kind of zig and zag as we do this. So I own 1 acre of woods. It surrounds my house. It is probably the poorest management of all the wood lots I work on. So we'll get in. I'll share my screen here so you can see. Owner 10 years, Jeff Tarbox, 10 years, 125 acres, family legacy property. Great, Jeff. I put together a short PowerPoint here. I'm going to pull my Zoom up on my other screen. Oops. So you have woods, now what? A lot of people that own woodlots or inherited woodlots or even purchase them for the purpose of just owning land, privacy for, well, whatever reason, they oftentimes find themselves a little bit overwhelmed with owning woodlots, and they don't really know where to start. And I guess to start, I'll tell you a short story. I have run the gamut as far as ownership, age, and experience. And I find a lot of older owners who haven't done anything with their land for a long time, maybe because it wasn't a priority for them. They maybe inherited a family farm or something and hadn't really thought much about it, but they get to really working in their forest late in life. And so many of them have come to me and said, I wish I had started this 20, 30 years ago, because I can see, the change we've made in the woodlot over time. And the forester I studied under, he always used to tell clients that the most important thing, that the greatest value in owning woodlot is putting in some effort, putting in some management strategies, and seeing the change over time, and really getting to enjoy that change and watch your forest grow. So I would say the first thing that's most important, if you just bought land or you haven't really gotten out in your forest, you don't know your lines very well, the most important thing is to get out and find your property on the ground. And most important is to look for blazes. Oftentimes woodlots have been blazed, they've been painted. There's evidence of barbed wire on lines. There may be old plow lines from where before the land was forested and it was field, they have utilized the land as ag, and there'll be plow lines, which will be a hump along the old property line. And oftentimes there's trees growing up on that as well. You'll find old ribbon flagging, and a lot of times you'll find larger trees along boundary lines just because you can't cut those trees. So you'll find a row of more mature forest or more mature trees in a line where you have younger forest on either side, excuse me. And again, a different age forest on one side of the line than the other often helps. And especially here in southern Maine, there's been considerable harvesting going on in the last 10 years. So you'll often have a pretty heavy cut line against the boundary, one side or the other, depending on who's the owner and their management goals, if any. So up in the corner, there is a small thing from the Maine Forest Service that shows where the blazes are on a properly blazed boundary line. And I find that about half the time the blazes have been put in the right place. Half the time they're not. They're kind of willy-nilly. So if the line goes through the tree, it should be on either side of the tree where the line intersects. If it's on one side or the other, the blaze should face towards where the line is. And I always encourage people to use kind of an off color, maybe red or yellow as a boundary color. A lot of foresters use blue to paint trees to be harvested when prepping a harvest. So as you can see in the photo here, this line was blue and we repainted it red so that there was no confusion with the contractor doing the cutting, that those are trees to be harvested and that they were a boundary line. So you're gonna find you're gonna have a variety of monuments or no monuments at all on corners of the property. This is a lot I was out on last week, and just this lot alone, this isn't even all of them, there was probably 6 or 7 different types of pins. You can have the aluminum capped pin, plastic in the middle up top, just a rebar on the top right, and then bottom left is an old pipe. Bottom center is a granite monument with a drill hole in the center. Sometimes you'll find drill holes in stone walls of just old field stone. Other times I've seen farmers use old axles. They'll bury axles in the ground with the axle end sticking up as a pin, or just an old tree with some barbed wire in it that has some blazes or other kind of markings to show that it's a corner. There's a variety of things that people have used. I would say look to your deed. You may have some info in there if you don't know what your monument should be or where they should be. So this slide I just put together to show you. The right is the town tax map. And as owners, you've probably all seen this. It shows what your lot number is. This one is from Parsonsfield down here in York County. And the lot on the right, the two I've circled or outlined in red, is the exact same lot as what's on the left. And one thing that I wanted to show was the bottom lot that says number 4, 135 acres. If you look at the map on the left that I prepared for the client, it looks nothing like the actual town property tax map. And that happens so often. So I would say You can use these as a general guide, but they're not the gospel when it comes to your boundary lines. I would say probably 75% of the time they're wrong. So I would encourage people to get out and find their own lines. And if there's a discrepancy from what the town has, don't get too worried about it. If you don't have a formal survey from a licensed surveyor, at that point, I would encourage you maybe to seek one out to clean up a boundary line or really show you where your lot may be. So this is something I produce for clients just as a corner map. All the yellow waypoints are their actual property pins. And then up in the corner, I give them a table of latitude and longitude of each corner so that they can find it in the future. Or if a pin goes missing or a monument goes missing, they have somewhat of a reference to know where that pin ought to be. This is just a copy of a deed for a client of mine recently. I used to find some lines. And if you don't have your deed, every county has a registry, and most of them are online at this point. And you can sign up as a landowner. It's free to sign up for an account, and you can put in your last name in the town that you live in or you own property in, and your deed you should be able to find it in a matter of minutes. But oftentimes deeds will have meets and bounds. They'll have what the actual corner markers are. Like in this case where it's outlined in red, it says beginning at a square cement post inscribed R. And I found that post right away, and it gave me a great starting point to work out what the lines were. So another tool people can use, it's free online, is Google Earth. I'm sure all of you have heard of it and maybe have played around with it or used it at some point, or not, maybe not. But there's a great tool on Google Earth that allows you to measure distance of a single line, or what they call a path, which allows multiple points on that line that you draw on. And the reason I included this slide is because, I'll use my mouse here. If you can see this kind of dark line in the forest, luckily we have a hardwood forest, so it's a little bit easier to see here, but that's an old stone wall that runs along the boundary of this lot. And you can zoom in even further. There's another one down here. And obviously the dark lines are streams. So you can get a real sense of what the land is, and where those features are on the ground. And you can actually utilize that line feature to then measure that stone wall if it is a boundary and know roughly where that ends. And Google Earth will also give you latitude and longitude that then you can plug into either your phone or any handheld GPS to create a waypoint of somewhere to look for a corner to work towards. Or just general features on the woodlot. If you want to plug out a path, you can plop in lat and long using Google Earth to determine what that lat and long is, and develop a path that way. Another useful tool for landowners that I encourage people to download if you have a smartphone is called OnX Hunt. And it works for both Android and iPhones or iPads even. But it's a general guide. So if you're afraid to go out in your woodlot because it's large and you don't want to get lost, you stick to your trails. This is a good tool to get you off those trails and start exploring a little bit deeper into the woodlot if you're unfamiliar with it. The blue dot is going to be your location, and then the red lines are, again, roughly the town tax map. It's GIS data, and it's sometimes inaccurate, but it's a general guide. It'll get you within 50 to 100 feet of where there may be a boundary, may not be, I have to say that, but it also gives you the abutting owner information. So if you don't know who your neighbors are, you can tap on those tax parcels and it'll bring you up the name and the total acreage of that parcel. So it's maybe a good way to get to know your neighbors' names if you don't know them also.
Is the app on xhunt.com?
The website is, but if you go to the App Store or I'm not sure what Android has for app downloading service, but you can download a free trial. And I believe the free trial is 2 weeks to get this parcel data. You can use the app without the parcel data. But to have the tax map lines, the red lines show up on the map here, it's $30 a year after 2 weeks. But if you got a couple weeks to really explore your woodlot, you can do it for free.
John, did you have a question? I noticed you had your mic off. John Correa?
No.
Okay. No
Yeah, I
problem.
can't see the chat too when sharing screen.
Yeah.
So if
That's okay. I'm keeping track.
yeah, if you see a question, forward it to me.
Yep.
So again, this is just a great tool to, I wouldn't rely on it, but it'll get you in the neighborhood. And I utilize it here and there when I'm on a property and I don't have any parcel data for it because I didn't do any homework before I met with a landowner, so we can get us a general idea where we are on the lot and where the bounds should be. So the next slide is just a general outline of a property. And I included this because it just shows you the different forest types before you go out, something to use. You can look for, if you're moving into a hardwood stand, this is more hardwood up in the corner here, or if you're out into the softwood, maybe hemlock or fir or pine. It's just a general tool to understand maybe where you are on your lot. And then you move into, these are 2-foot contour lines laid on top of that map. And I find this type of map really helpful because you can really understand the lay of the land. You can get a really good idea of where your steeper slopes are here, where the contour is really tight. This is a big open wetland with a large stream running through the middle of it. And there's kind of an old earth bridge here. I'm not sure what it was for at one time, but you can see it's really steep. And it's an interesting feature that if you were on it, you would know. So you can become real familiar with your land if you look at a contour map and maybe print one off and take it out with you if you have that opportunity. Any forester could give you this on your property as well. But it's a great tool, again, just to become familiar with the lay of the land. It helps you really understand where water is going to be on the lot. And when it comes to laying out trails and doing a harvest plan or a forest management plan, knowing where your water is on your property is a very important tool, especially right now, where you'll find if you've got a harvest going and you don't know where your water is headed, you're in trouble. So again, these are where the intermittent streams are on that property. So it gives you an idea of where your crossings may end up, or where you may want to put a trail up around the headwater of the stream, or if you want to be down lower along the wetland, what the slope is going to be and where that trail may end up. The next piece here, I lay on these lines here are the stone
Jeffrey,
walls.
Can I
Yeah.
just ask a question while you're on the other map?
Sure. This one here?
Farmington. So when you have a thought, when a landowner hires a forester and you have a harvest going on, wouldn't they have seen the water ahead of time rather than you telling them that there's water?
Absolutely. But it's good to understand where those streams are in location to the property, to maybe seek out some areas where you might want to put a trail or a crossing. But yeah, any licensed forester ahead of a harvest should know where the water is. But again, with the rain we've had in the recent years, oftentimes streams are changing because of the volume and the shortness of the storms and the volume of the storm in that short time. And for example, I'm working on a property right now in Poland, and we have runoffs that probably haven't been wet in a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, that are now carrying water that may not have in the past.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I think it's important to know just generally where the valleys are in your land. For example, like some of these small ones may drain some of these upper areas that may not look like a stream, but become one during heavy rainfall events. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. You know, I've always trusted that somebody else is going to know that, but what you're saying, it's good for the owner to be aware of where that water is. So,
yeah, and any good forester listens very closely to the landowner. So if you're very familiar with your land, you've been out, you've walked these streams up and down from boundary line to the other boundary line, you know where it's going to be wide, where there's a wider floodplain or maybe a wetter soil along that floodplain versus maybe an upper area where you have some gravel or some loam and it's drier. And any good forester will listen to your input saying, hey, this is where this is where we think we ought to cross this, or this is where it's been crossed in the past. We didn't like that. It looked awful. It rutted out. Is there another option? So it's really just a general rule of becoming familiar and understanding the ground and how it's been used in the past and how you can pass along any input you have. I think the most successful harvests in my experience are one where the forester, the landowner, and the logger are all in communication with each other. That's when you get the best outcome. If the landowner's comfortable talking to the harvester, if the forester's comfortable talking to landowner and harvester, and maybe relaying uncomfortable topics or conversation that maybe all three don't want to have together.
Yep.
But that's a whole nother can of worms to go down that road.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Sure. So again, the next piece here is just showing where the stone walls are. And I find this a really useful tool because it'll show you where the improved land was in the past and maybe where the barn was on an old farm site. Oftentimes down here in York County, we have a lot of cattle runs, which will be two stone walls together that lead back to where a barn on the property was. And that'll show you oftentimes, again, where the best soil was, because they'll rock the best ground for cropland or hay fields. And then maybe some of the other land that doesn't have any stone walls, but may have barbed wire around the edge, is going to be the really steep, rocky ground that maybe was forested pasture or even open pasture and just used for cattle or sheep or other things. But that'll help you understand where the previous owners in the past have thought this is a priority of ground. It has the best site index, or maybe it's the driest. And oftentimes that's where you're going to grow your best timber also. So it's a useful tool to understand what the previous people were thinking in the past, and how the land was used in the past also. I look for cattle runs. I look for large pastures. I look for large stone walls. Ones that have really well-built rock walls were often the ones closest to the farm, versus ones that are just kind of small and look like they threw rocks out to pile. So again, it's just something you can look for when you're out on the lot.
Hey, Jeff,
Yeah.
someone was asking if those contour lines can be added by Google. That's a Google Earth map?
No, this is a mapping program I use, and it's statewide available. It's on the Office of GIS, and it actually can be added to Google Maps. If you download it as what they call a KML file, they have the contours for each town. And if you download it as a KML file and save it where you can find it, you can upload it to the Google Earth. And it'll show, you'll have to change the attributes, because I believe it'll just come up as yellow contour lines that are oftentimes more than 1 pixel in width. So they look a little bit imposing on the map. Whereas if you make them smaller and change the color, you can often see more than just the contour lines. But yes, it should be available. If you're somewhat tech savvy, you should be able to pull that up on Google Earth.
And I'll jump in one more time and say that I don't think that woodland owners necessarily need to be tech savvy, but they should at least know what's available to them, what kind of information that they should learn about their land, whether it's their forest or, pulling these types of maps for them or not. Just knowing that these exist and these are useful for these different reasons, I think is pretty powerful. Absolutely.
I find these 2-foot contours, I use them more than any other layer, just because it really helps understand the ground. So this is just a picture of an old trail, and I included it because I think probably the number one way people get out in their woods is trail building, because a lot of people use their land to hike, or they put a trail around the boundary to keep an eye on things and know what's going on around their lot. But again, I think this is the easiest way to get out in your lot. And even if it's not this well improved, if it's not stumped or anything, just going out and flagging yourself a trail so that you can use your flags as your markers as you go is really important. It'll get you out and understanding what's important out on the lot to you, or maybe features around the lot that you really find special and like, and want to protect during management activities. So I included this as, once you become familiar with your land, you've been out on it plenty, you understand it, you know the ground pretty well, you've been to all parts of it. Consider what's most important to you about your land, and think about the future and what you'd like to get out of your land, what you'd like to see. If you'd like it to change, if you'd like it to remain similar to what it is now in the future. That's kind of an open-ended one in the sense that think about what's going to happen with the land once you're gone, because in the greater scheme of things, our lifetimes are so short compared to forest management goals a lot of times. I worked on some properties that are 5th generation and have been managed for over 100 years. So it's often not about us really long term. It's about good stewardship and handing that land down to somebody else who's going to take care of it in maybe the way that you would like to see happen. But again, I think finding a consulting forester at some point is important. Finding somebody who shares the same values as you and really listens to what you want out of your land and works to help you achieve those goals long term is really important. And as a consultant, after I meet with people, most foresters will meet with you for free. They'll spend an hour or two on your land without giving you a bill, and they'll walk your property and talk with you about what they see initially. And after that time, you may find that maybe, the person's personality isn't right for you, or maybe they're talking a whole lot more about timber and you're interested in wildlife. Feel free to call somebody else. I mean, I never get offended when I end a meeting with somebody and they say, well, I just, maybe we're not the right fit. I'm happy to give them other recommendations of foresters that I think might fit their goals better than I can. And then at that point, look for cost share opportunities, look for grant opportunities for forest landowners. And there's plenty of them out there. There's a few I'll show you in the next slide that have money available for forest management plans, and also then thereafter activities in the forest to improve or meet your goals. And again, have a forest management plan written to achieve what you want, not just a boilerplate plan to show you what's there. So cost share opportunities, some of you probably are familiar with these. There's the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And this is a federally funded program through the USDA. It is a great program. They have really good funding rates. They claim they are 75% of the total cost, or upwards of 90% of the total cost. So if you were to sign up for a forest plan, they would cover 3/4 of the cost of that plan. That program also has grant opportunities after the plan is written for a variety of different forest stand improvement practices, or wildlife practices, or stream crossings, or access control for gates. There's a variety of different things that they will, again, give you additional funding for on your property. The second one is Maine Woodswise, and that is a state-run program by the Maine Forest Service. It is much less red tape. It is lower cost share rates, so they don't pay as much as the federally funded one, but it's much faster. If you need a tree growth plan written, if you sign up next month, you're likely to get that approval fairly quickly. And there is not nearly as much paperwork with the Maine Forest Service as there is with the NRCS. And it's a more nimble program. You can have a really good plan written. They don't always have money for projects. That changes year to year based on funding available from the federal government, whereas NRCS has funding almost every year written in through the Farm Bill. And oftentimes those funding rates are pretty good. So that's the end of the slides I have. Let me see, stop sharing here. So if anyone's got just general questions about ownership or something that has piqued your interest, and maybe that's the reason you're here today, I'm happy to answer questions or go over anything else. But I think just becoming familiar with your property is really the most important thing I've found for landowners, and get out and enjoy it. And if you don't have goals, maybe you don't have anything really pinned down, I think spending time on your property will help you shape what's most interesting to you, or what's most important to you.
And Jeff, just to jump on a point you made, getting into the woods. Jeff's actually written a few times in the newsletter about just that, literally walking and even just following your boundary line if you're worried about getting lost, but having that app in your phone and getting in there a few times and seeing the changes if you do maybe, one season after and then another season. The other opportunity is the Maine Forest Service has 10 district foresters. So wherever your land is, there's a district forester that can work with you. They love coming to your land. I just met with one yesterday who hasn't been asked to visit anybody's land recently. She's in the Androscoggin, Franklin County, Somerset County area. She'd love a call and get a walk and talk to happen. And what's interesting about that opportunity is that they don't have any, they're not part of, they will never be part of a consulting forester role. They will always be an advisor for you. So they are their interest is in making sure forests are healthy, that landowners are feeling informed and provide that kind of support. So that's always a good partnership that we like to promote. And then Jeff, you mentioned tree growth. We won't get into it today, but there is if you're not aware, as landowners, if you are planning on producing commercial or doing commercial harvesting or producing timber products off of your land could be enrolled in a current use program called Tree Growth Tax Program. And so that could be a whole program, a whole webinar in itself, because it's not that complex. It's just that there's always a lot of questions associated with it. And it's not always a good fit for landowners. So we're not saying that everybody should be in tree growth, but we ask that new landowners consider tree growth because it will reduce your tax rate, but you do have responsibilities and requirements, and once you're in, you got to stay in it. So you got to make sure it's the program for you.
Most of the time, it's a state-run program, but it's implemented by the towns. So it's your local assessor who will be after you to renew your tree growth status. And I tell people anytime I meet with them who are considering it, I tell them if your taxes aren't really a financial burden to you, then I wouldn't enroll, because it allows you to do what you want with your land in the future. If you do enroll in tree growth, you're limited to what you can do with that property in the future, as far as development or maybe creating fields and things. So if your taxes aren't very high on the property, I wouldn't consider being in tree growth. But if you do want a reduced rate and your goal is to grow a forest and that's what you want, then it's a great program for those people. You do have to maintain a forest management plan, but if you're an active manager outside of tree growth, you're likely doing that anyway. Yeah. And one point on forest plans, that they run the gamut. Every forester writes their plan a little different. And one thing I stress when I meet with new clients is to let me know what their level of experience is in forestry knowledge. Do they know their tree species? Have they ever implemented a harvest? Have they been around harvesting equipment? Because there's so much to it when it comes down to writing a plan, that if you read through it and you don't understand half of it, it's useless to you and you'll put it on a shelf and won't really think about it. Where I really like to write plans that people like to read, they find engaging and they learn from them, but they're able to use it as a working document also, so that when they're ready to go implement a harvest or considering one, they can open up their plan and say, yep, this is what it says to do. This is the date that is recommended, or these are the criteria that are focused around the harvest. And really gives you a pretty concrete path in terms of the next 10 years, what you should focus on, or maybe where the effort is most beneficial.
And it's easier if you are passing your land to the next generation at some point. There's a little bit of a pathway for that next generation to continue the work that you're doing on your property.
That's an interesting point. And this may be a good thing to bring up for new owners. If you do have a forest and you are going to harvest timber at some point, you will be paying taxes on that harvest income. And so when you're considering a forest plan, sometimes foresters will offer you a price of with inventory or without inventory. And what an inventory is some of you probably already know this, but it's what's standing for timber, what the value of that standing timber is, and what the volume is. So let's say it's white pine and hardwood logs. 10,000 board feet, it's worth $2,500 for that product. And it should be a table of what those products are and what their value is. And the benefit to new owners of having an inventory is it gives you a starting point. It gives you what your value of your forest is in terms of standing timber, but it also gives you your cost basis for when it comes time to cut wood and file your taxes. And you can really utilize that data in a way that you can reduce your tax basis at the end of a harvest.
Okay, let's open it up for questions. Who's got a question? I see Jeff, you have your mic, your mute is off. Jeff Tarbox, maybe you want to start the questions?
Yeah, and it could be anything forestry related. It doesn't necessarily have to be new ownership.
I guess one of the questions is going to be, I know we work out a forester for this, but again, finding people to do some work on the, to do some selective cutting. Sometimes maybe if we're doing some timber stand improvement, how to get some help in doing that. Is it in your locality? It seems to be harder and harder to find people to actually do work on small stands.
Yeah, stand size is a tough one. And here in Southern Maine, it's funny you bring that up because I don't think 10 acres in some places is even a viable option to cut wood on anymore. And tree growth has talked about that too. They've at the state level. But when it comes to timber stand improvement, there are some groups who do contract work. And some of these larger outfits like AFM, American Forest Management, have a Rolodex of people who do that type of work, TSI work. I do it myself personally, and it's not easy work a lot of times. If you're out there with a brush saw or you're doing herbicide work to do competition control or whatever. But again, yeah, finding a contractor when it comes to actually commercial harvesting, if you have a smaller acreage or a smaller volume, it becomes harder to attract a really good contractor. Oftentimes they'll be more interested in larger jobs. And that's where a forester really comes in handy, is because they'll be the guy to say, hey, this is the job, I want it done. Oftentimes they have really good relationships with contractors. And they'll kind of force them into a corner to cut your wood lot if it's smaller. So again, a forester is going to be your best friend when it comes to a smaller lot and trying to find a really good person to do a harvest on your lot. I always tell people, don't call cold call harvesters and don't answer solicitations, often because the person who's looking for work may not do the best quality of work. Does that answer your question, Jeff? Please feel free to follow up.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah. Also, just another point on the TSI stuff, timber stand improvement. And if people aren't aware of what that is, it runs the gamut of commercial work down to what they call pre-commercial work, which is thinning saplings. And if you go through a program like the Natural Resources Conservation Service, they have money available to do that work. And they often have a list of contractors who also do that work so that they can get it implemented on your property.
I'll put a plug in for a webpage we have on our website, mainwoodlandowners.org. We have a new woodland owners page, and it really is a list, just links of resources similar to what Jeff has brought up today. So you don't need to remember everything. You can just go to under resources in our website, New Woodland Owners, and you'll see we've got a ton of links for these types of early management questions and needs. I saw Jay Esper. Yes, go right ahead. I see your hand.
Jesperson.
What's your name?
Eddie Jesperson.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay.
Jump on in. And then I got Jamie after that.
So I have a 115 acres in Farmington, and it's in management and tree growth. And a few years ago, I guess it was like 8 years ago, we got a NRCS grant for a 2-acre crop tree
Release?
release. Yes. So we had loggers come in and they did a great job with our forester. Now, what's happened there is that the beech has just everything's regrowing.
Yeah.
So it looked great when it was happening. And now I just wasn't, I guess I wasn't prepared to deal with that again. So for the 2 acre, it was part of a larger harvest, but so these saplings now are, 10, 12, 15 feet tall, with a 2-inch diameter, and they're just like everywhere. So what are my options? Do I have to hire a logger to come in and clear it, or just leave it alone?
One thing you can do when it comes to beech, you might be able to find somebody, maybe a licensed forester or a forest intern, who will come in maybe with a brush saw and cut back some of that beech. You can also use herbicide as an option. When it's that size, it becomes a bit more expensive, obviously. But one thing you can do, beech is prolific for sprouting. When you cut one beech stump, it triggers sprouts all through the root system of that one tree. So you'll get about 1,000 back to every one you cut.
Right.
And it's the bane of a forester's existence is American beech. But one thing that I've learned from other foresters and silviculturalists is if you cut one of those stems 2 feet high instead of at the root, you won't trigger that response in the root system. So you'll get sprouts off of that open face cut where you cut the beech, but you won't get it across the forest floor. It looks a little unsightly at first, but it's a means to an end ultimately to get some other stuff growing instead of beech. So yeah, if you cut it 2 to 3 feet high, let it sprout a little bit, and then come back and cut it flush at the stump. A few years later, you won't get those sprouts, and you'll start to eliminate that stuff.
So there are loggers that would do that?
Probably more a forester or a logger who is also in the business of doing pre-commercial thinning would be my recommendation to you. There may be somebody who fits that bill, but I would just call around and say you have some pre-commercial work you need done, and ask them if they're familiar with the process of doing that, or if they can give you an estimate on those 2 acres.
Okay.
I would say on average, just to give you an idea, NRCS funds what they call competition control, which is exactly what you're talking about. Underneath your crop tree release, you have all this new regeneration. And their cost estimates for doing it by hand, I think is around $600 an acre. So it's not a huge investment. But to do everything on that acre, it's probably going to be over $1,000 an acre, or even upwards beyond that.
Just leave it?
You can just leave it. Yeah. I mean, as a forester, oftentimes people will say you're either growing your overstory or you're growing your understory. So if you've done a crop tree release, you're focused on that overstory.
Yeah.
In the beech.
Great.
What's that?
The big trees are doing great.
Yeah. Yeah. So your concern may not be focused. It becomes an aesthetic thing, really, when you get down to the understory after a crop tree release. If you don't like what it looks like, you certainly can put the time in to change it. But if you're focused on what's growing in the overstory, you have time, maybe allow that beech to grow up to be commercially sized. And then when you do your next cut of those crop trees in 10, 15 years, you can remove some of that beech at that time too.
Good.
And I will say I'm just putting a plug into for our next program will be Ask the Forester, December 1 with Harold Burnett. He's our forester on staff. And beech always comes up in these conversations. So please join us and see what he says. So,
yeah, recently the Maine Forest Service released a press release on beech leaf disease. That's a new phenomenon in Maine, and some foresters rejoiced that there was another disease that'll attack beech, but ultimately it's not a great thing. But I spend a lot of time working with landowners on how to keep beech back and allow some other species to grow through the beech.
Jamie.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Jeffrey and Jennifer. I'm a new landowner, about 40 acres, maybe 15-minute drive west of Freeport. And 2 questions for you. The first is most of the property is surrounded by stone walls, and so it's quite clear where the boundary is. And then there's one long section, 400, 500, 600, 700 yards, where if I follow a survey from a stone wall, like it would be different than where some of the flags are on the property. And so I'm curious, sort of the first question, how would you suggest navigating that? And with neighbors and with, town lines and understanding it? Go
How
ahead.
wide is the section you're talking about, roughly?
That section's along a driveway, which is maybe 600 I'd say like 300 yards wide.
Okay.
It varies, but it's, and like, the discrepancy might be like 30 yards different.
So if I'm understanding you right, if you follow the stone wall, where the stone wall ends, the flagging goes off at a different angle.
It's rather that if you follow the stone wall straight, there are no flags until you
Okay.
get like 300 yards down. And then there are flags which aren't in line with the stone wall, even though the survey suggests they should be.
Okay.
And then it kind of cuts a corner. And there's supposed to be a pin, but the pin is missing, and there are just these flags.
Yeah, I see this a lot in southern Maine. And the question I guess I would ask is, were the flags put up by the surveyor, or a landowner, or a hunter? Oftentimes you'll find flagging is not accurate. And sometimes people will flag just on their own, thinking they know where the boundary is, and it's not right. Probably the most important thing is to, if you have a copy of your deed, start with the deed. Do you have a formal survey?
I have a survey, and I don't know if it's official or not, but it was a survey that was passed along to me as part of the deed.
If it was official, it will have the surveyor's license number and oftentimes their signature in the bottom corner.
Okay.
And you can call that surveyor if they're still licensed and ask them about that.
Yep.
Or you can hire a surveyor to do just part of the property, not do the entire thing, but just focus on that line. You probably know that. Right now, it's a long wait for a surveyor. It's 6 months for a good one.
I called them and I said, you did some work a while ago. Would you mind coming out and just clarifying? And they're like, maybe someday, but not.
Yeah, southern Maine's wild right now. It's some guys are a year out.
Yeah.
I would look for more evidence. If there is any sign of barbed wire, any sign of blazes that have grown over on trees, I would maybe, if you have a tape, if there's distances on that survey from where you're talking about, if you have a 300-foot tape, start going out, laying that tape down, and really get to where your corner should be, because it'll get you right in the area. But without seeing it, I don't know that I can really give you a lot of good advice, and other than hiring another surveyor to come out and really define where that line is. But just, I would get out there and spend a lot of time zigging and zagging, going back and forth, and just looking for anything that would show me where the line might be in the right location. But again, I wouldn't trust tape. I never do.
Thank you. I've done a lot of zigzagging and around there. Do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
So in buying this property as well, after we purchased it, we realized that not only is a field in sort of getting a tax benefit, but the forest is in tree growth. And in addition to having a forest management plan, is there a commitment that we have to, for example, harvest a certain amount of something over a time period, or how much flexibility is there to do what we think is best for the woods and what we want versus a commitment given this?
The tree growth tax program is written in a way that it kind of relies on the private consultant, licensed professional forester to give you recommendations. And at your first goal has to be to produce commercial forest products. And if you look up the statute of tree growth tax law, there's a list of what those products are. So it's maybe not necessarily logs or whatever. But at some point you're going to have to follow that forest plan in some way. If the forester you have that wrote the plan says do nothing for the next 10 years, then you don't have to do anything. If your forester's good, he'll give you opportunities to do some of your own work on your own land to improve what you got. But if they say harvest is recommended in the next 10 years, you probably ought to look to a professional to help you with that. And if they say it ought to be this volume, you don't have to necessarily follow it to a T, but you have to cut some wood at some point within that program. Oftentimes I tell people there's 3 big factors with a cut. It's weather, it's contractor, it's markets. And you oftentimes don't get the trifecta of those 3 things lining up. You'll have to kind of give on one, just like buying a house. You always have to have something that gets set aside because it's not right. And I sometimes use that as a guide for landowners. If weather is really important, you want the ground to be protected in your harvest, then use that as your guide. If money isn't the driving force, maybe when the market's down, but you have a drought, it's a good time to cut, even though the market's down. So forest plans are a really good guide of what you should be doing in tree growth. But at the end of the day, it's really based on your forester and you to come up with a good plan at what point should you cut wood.
Thank you.
Jamie,
Sure.
quick question for you. Did you know your land was in tree growth when you bought it?
I think that there was a few sentences in one email exchange that suggested that there was a benefit, and it was really leaning toward the farmstead benefit as opposed to the tree growth. So I don't know if it was purposely my understanding is it should have been very clear and very direct. It wasn't clear and direct, but they might have said enough to suggest that, in a legal court, they would have said.
They were clear. So you're in 2 current use programs? You're in farmland?
Yes.
That's an interesting question, Jen, because I find people that have just bought land say tree growth. Well, that just means it has trees on it. That's great. They're growing. They don't realize it's a current use program and you're on the hook for some, some work to be done there.
We are, I'm in the process of developing a guide that's hopefully going to be out in the middle of next year for folks to really feel like they have all the information they need. And one of the areas, or one of the professionals we want to work with are realtors. So that they can be, they can really understand the gravity of land being in tree growth. They may already, but the kind of how important it is for landowners to know.
And
John, looks like you have your mic off or your mute off. Did you want to jump in?
Well, I heard Jeff mention markets. So are there any markets?
I would say across the state right now, the high grade markets are great. When it comes to saw logs, dimension products, they're strong. They're not as high as I personally think they ought to be based on the current demand, but they're slowly, mills are really starting to realize that to get the wood they need, they're going to have to pay a little bit more for it. When it comes to low grade fiber products, it's up and down. It's week by week. And there's, for me in the area I work in, the big market, and probably for you also, is going to be Nine Dragons up in West Paris. They buy a lot of pulp, and then biomass markets, which are absolutely terrible at this point. I'm hoping that they improve a little bit when energy costs go up. So do biomass markets, because the feasibility of burning wood to make electricity makes more sense when natural gas prices go up. So it becomes a bit more profitable for the producer, but at the point that it makes it down the line to the guy who produces the chips at the mill, it often takes a lot longer for that person to see that at the end of the road, and especially the landowner. I mean, you guys are last in line when it comes to that. So I would say, if you have a low grade harvest to do, you're going to want to watch the markets. You're going to want to choose your contractor, because contractors are the ones that oftentimes hold the contracts with the mill. And certain people will be put on quota before somebody else. So if you got a lot of low grade wood to get rid of, maybe ask that question of your forester for him to ask the contractor, what's your market at the pulp mill? How many loads can you move a week? And will we get shut down during the middle of the cut? It's definitely something that has changed in the last 10 years.
Right.
I see biomass is a big question mark in Maine long term. Is it feasible to continue? A lot of contractors are losing money at this point to move chips. it's just part of the business now that they have a chipper and they don't know what to do with the residual wood, and the landowners want a clean job. So they're kind of held to do it at this point.
I've heard that some pellets are going to Europe.
Interesting. I read that not too long ago. The pellet market in Maine, there was a big push for it probably 7 or 8 years ago. And some government buildings even put in hoppers and pellet furnaces to have them delivered to the facilities. But there was such a glut on the market because of the mild winters we've had in recent years, that there were so many pellets produced and so many stored that there wasn't a great need for it. And I've always said to be a landowner and to buy pellets when you have round firewood out back it's a hard thing to do, and you can just go cut your own fuel. But it's a lot more efficient over time.
Chuck Davis, I see your mute is off. Did you want to jump in? All right. Any other questions? We have another minute or two. Well, Jeff, I think we're going to offer this again, but maybe we'll take a few of the questions that came out of this and maybe expand on a few things.
Yeah.
The next presentation, but we're going to try to do more for those newish landowners, because there's more and more of them now in Maine.
If there's a topic, anyone in the audience today that if you really want to see expanded on, send Jen an email and just say, hey, this is what we're interested in, and we're happy to put something together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're really responsive to the woodland owners. That's what we're all about as an organization. And again, to plug in the our next online program, it will be a brown bag lunch hour type program from noon to 1 on December 1st with Harold Burnett, Ask the Forester. He's a great one to ask about, not that Jeff isn't, but we were focused on the new woodland owners. And Harold is our land trust forester. So he's doing, he can give you updates about our land trust, the work he's doing, and answer questions about, he's also very, aware of the market, but also about best practices and reflecting what Maine Woodland Owners is trying to demonstrate in our woodland management work as well. So, and also he's been involved in some of our forest carbon work. So he'll give a little update on where we are with pursuing the possibility of using our land trust lands in forest carbon opportunities in that market. It's not a straight line though. It's not an easy answer for small woodland owners. I'll just give a
Alan asked if the next one will be recorded.
Yes, all of our programs are recorded. So, and then I post them on our website. Some of the, I would say the heavier topic ones I put on our members page, and that's a benefit for people who are members. If you're not a member of Maine Woodland Owners, we would love to have you. Go to our website and click on membership. So mainwoodlandowners.org, and then click on our membership button, and we'd love to have you. You'd get our monthly newsletter. You'll get email updates and special opportunities on our members page. So.
I would also follow up by saying, if you are a woodland owner and you're proud of the work you've done and you want to show it off, we're happy to host a walk and talk on your woodlot.
That's a good idea.
And advertise to your neighbors so that you can learn from them and they can learn from you and start to build a community in your area to help each other.
Yeah, Jeff is our chapter leader for the Southern Maine chapter here. So, and we've had some really interesting programs. And a lot of times Forest Service folks want to be part of that because they know that the people that come to our programs are the people they want to be talking to. So that's always a nice added benefit. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. I will be sending out a reminder when the recording is posted, and I'll send a reminder out about December 1st program. And I hope everyone has a great holiday and enjoy the seasonal weather that we seem to be getting at this point. And thanks, Jeff.
Thanks everybody for
All right.
joining.
Have a great night.